Well, good morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim. We continue our reading with Chapter 9, Part B. A few minutes' walk took them to a restaurant of the poorer class. It was a long, narrow room with a sanded floor and bare tables. But it was clean, and the food was wholesome. Gordon drank a cup of coffee, and presently began to talk again in quieter tones. "I never knew until today how horribly I have failed in life," he said sadly. "No one would say that but yourself," Gaunt eagerly responded. "In this matter, what other people say has no weight whatever," said Gordon. "They can't possibly know another man's standard of achievement. An achievement can only be measured by aspiration. I aspired to do very great things once. Do you know why I failed? Partly, of course, through my own inefficiency, but really through the perversity of judgment which I was unable to conquer. The Church calls me a rebel, and yet my life has been undone through a blind, excessive loyalty to the Church. I imagine that all real work for the world must be done through the organization of the Church, and that the organization could be remodeled by the intrusion of new ideas. So I began with the theology, and you know the result. After my deposition, I went on with my mission work, encouraged by all kinds of golden dreams that men would rally to me, that I should lead a movement, and that the Church would at last come to my point of view, and each of these dreams in turn proved false. In other words, I tried to do exactly what you're trying to do now, until after 10 years of lonely experiment, I made a discovery. I discovered that the Church had turned her back upon the real facts of life." "In what way?" said Gaunt. "In every way you can imagine. 30 years ago she turned her back on the prophets of a new science, who were opening new heavens and a new earth to the astonished eyes of men. She refused to listen to them. She derided and denounced them, and the result was she lost the leadership of thought among the intelligent men. Today she turns her back precisely in the same way upon new scholarship, which devotes itself to the investigation of religion. She does not so much as ask whether these great scholars are right or wrong. She simply chooses not to listen to them, and the result is she has lost the leadership of religious thought as she lost the leadership of scientific thought, and intelligent men prefer to do their own thinking upon religion without any guidance from the Church. But worst of all, she has lost the knowledge of her own mission. She is totally unacquainted with the nature of those ideals which once made her a living force, and by which she has the right to exist. Look at New York. Where do you find the most churches? In the localities where wealth is most evident. Christianity has openly become a church of the rich. It is the inevitable result of a paid ministry. How can it be otherwise under a system which encourages all those elements of social rivalry and display which are found in the world of commerce? Yes, you can find churches enough on Fifth Avenue, but as you travel eastward, the church spires become fewer and fewer and fewer. Isn't it evident that the Church has practically given up trying to reach the poor? And in every American city, the story is the same. The Church constantly retreats before the invasion of poverty. Downtown churches are constantly sold for immense sums of money, and the wealth so gained is employed to build gorgeous religious social clubs in the suburbs among the comfortable and wealthy classes. Then in turn, these classes, encouraged by the selfishness of the Church, forget the existence of the poor, and the result is districts like these, rotten with disease and poverty, full of forgotten and despairing people for whom life is hell. Oh, that I could have my life to live over again! How differently I would live it! But it has taken me a half-century to learn wisdom, and now it is too late to apply that wisdom. I am an old man. But you are young, and perhaps I may yet do something to redeem the past if I can bequeath to you the wisdom won out of a life of errors." Gaunt was profoundly moved. As he thought of Gordon's history and character, the courage of the one, the purity and nobleness of the other, his heart went out in love and admiration to the old man. He laid his hand gently on the old man's hand and said, "Believe me, you shall find in me an obedient and loyal disciple. What is it you would have me do?" "For the present, nothing more than what you are doing. After all, you must find your way yourself. You must make your own experiment. But I think you will learn more rapidly than I. If I mistake not, you are already near the end of the experimental stage." "But tell me," pressed Gaunt, "am I taking the right course?" "Every course is right as long as a man follows right alone." "Is there nothing less enigmatic that you can say to your disciple?" asked Gaunt, with a grave smile. "What we have seen this morning, has that no message?" asked Gordon. "A message all too terrible. It is ineffaceable." "And its meaning?" asked Gordon. "Its meaning is bitterly plain. I begin to see the absurdity of my idea of ever touching these miserable lives through a church organized as mine is. They will not come to me, and I know not how to go to them. Between us there is a great gulf fixed." "Yes, that is one thing, and a very important thing too," said Gordon. "Yet contradictory as it may appear, I wish you to continue the experiment. Get the poor into your church if you can. Not, of course, these slaves of the tenements, for nothing could draw them from their miserable retreats, but the poor as are accessible to you in your own neighborhood. I see another thing too," Gaunt continued, "the most incurable levity of our temperament. And yet no, it's not quite that. It's kind of a buoyant thoughtlessness, a dislike to pierce below the surface of things, a habit of ignoring unpleasant issues. We lack gravity of mind. We are intoxicated with the prosperity, and we are reaping its rewards so rapidly that no one stops to ask at what price. No one wants to examine the dread foundations of the crushed and ruined lives on which that prosperity rests. The very existence of this city of filth and squalor, of misery and disease, in the midst of another city of unparalleled luxury and extravagance, is the proof." "And there you are not quite just," said Gordon. "I don't grant the incurable levity of our temperament." "How would you describe it?" asked Gaunt. "It's nothing worse than the temperament of youth. Youth often appears thoughtless, and yet there is no more certain fact than that youth is peculiarly susceptible to idealism. As a nation, we are a race of idealists. We are so because we are young. Is there any country in the world where any new idea is welcomed so enthusiastically? Where is there any people so ready to follow any kind of leader who appears to have a message? Mormonism, Zionism, Christian Science, and 100 other curious and even absurd forms of faith. Each can get a hearing, can build itself into a power, can attract multitudes of adherents. And all this can go on in the midst of a people supposed to be governed solely by the worship of the almighty dollar. Why, the accusation is absurd. If Americans adore the dollar, it's simply for want of something better to adore. And even then it's not the mere possession of money that attracts them, but the power which it implies. Give them a nobler ideal, and they'll respond to it as only a race of idealists can. And there lies your hope, Gaunt. You are dealing with a young nation." "Doesn't your own experience in the church contradict you?" asked Gaunt. "I'm not speaking of the church, but of the nation, a very different thing," said Gordon. "The church has willfully made herself a refuge of all that is conservative and reactionary in American life. Of course, when I spoke of youth in the nation, I didn't mean young people, but let me ask you, nevertheless, do you find young people in the churches? Very rarely are they there in any numbers. 9/10 of the people in the churches are over 40. You'll find more bald and gray heads in a church than in any other assembly of equal numbers gathered in any auditorium for any purpose between Boston and San Francisco. The church of the future must be found outside the churches." "And what is your picture of the church of the future?" asked Gaunt. Gordon was silent for several minutes, and in his eyes there was that withdrawn look which had already impressed Gaunt so powerfully. He seemed to be gazing into inscrutable distances, traversing illimitable realms of thought and vision, listening for the low-breathed words of some prophetic revelation. When he spoke again, it was slowly, as a man in some sort of mesmeric trance. "It will not be called a church," he said. "It will have neither creeds, nor forms, nor subscriptions. Its law will be freedom, its condition service. It will unite all men who love humanity in a common service of humanity. It will be a society of equals. It will worship Christ, but neither as God nor man, rather as a living presence in all men, making all men divine. It will attract everybody, for it will include everybody. Men will not be able to afford to stay outside. To do so would be to renounce their heritage as men. It will be based on universal ideas. It will make the slum impossible, for it will make impossible the greed and neglect which produced it. It will be terribly just, so just that unrighteous men will fear its disapproval far more than any other form of punishment. It will be infinitely pitiful, so pitiful that the life most bruised will be certain of its consolation. And I think it will be called the League of Service. And its emblem will be a mother with a child in her arms." The voice died away in an awed whisper. The League of Service. The words seemed to fill the dingy restaurant with light. The light spread until even the dreary bastilles of poverty were illuminated, and their roofs were plumed with sacred flame. And Gaunt knew that in that moment a great thing had happened. An ideal had entered the world, an ideal which he knew was worth living for and dying for. And that's the end of chapter 9. Next week we'll continue with chapter 10, the assimilation of Margaret. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.